because the setting is how everything starts and what it really kind of just sets what the author is wanting us to see and like kind of giving us an overview of the book. So if you guys could all turn to chapter 1, just to kind of get how he describes it. Okay, even in like the first paragraph, which I think is one of the most important paragraphs, he says, "A throng of bearded men in sack-colored garments and gray steeple-crowned hats, intermixed with women wearing hoods and other bareheaded, assembled in front of a wooden edifice, the door of which was heavily timbered with oak and studded with iron spikes." So, what do you guys think is so important about having this this kind of a setting, like being in this kind of a time period in a town that looks like this and all of these kind of things?
Well, I think it's kind of, Hawthorne's kind of trying to show like all these, he uses a lot of religious symbolism, at least in my opinion, with all the kind of the buildings and like the pillory. When Hester's standing up there being judged by the town, it's kind of like the religious idea of a judgment day, where they kind of hold you accountable to everything you've done in your life. And kind of like how the jail she's in kind of represents what happens to a sinner, that they are held in prison or like hell or something like that. And so it kind of, and in the 1600s, I feel like that it kind of shows, I mean, a sin like adultery could happen anytime, but in the 1600s, in this Puritan society, it's very severe. And so it shows the severity of kind of this judgmental things, because in the 1800s, where Hawthorne was, I feel like, I mean, it would be severe compared to today, but it wouldn't necessarily have the effects as if you were in a strictly Puritan society, where if you do that, then you're severely condemned. So.
And like, well, just the first paragraph, it sets up the book, and it says sack-colored garments and gray, and studded with iron spikes. I don't know, it just kind of sets up as a depressed or like there's not a good feeling of the book. You can tell there's going to be grief, and just it sets up that there's going to be like hard times and struggle that are throughout the book. So.
Yeah, I feel like the first paragraph and the first chapter altogether really foreshadows what's going to happen in the book. You can kind of tell that there's going to be some good parts because they talk about the rose bush outside the prison, but as a whole, you can tell that the book's going to be kind of dark and sad, just based off of the setting that they did.
I think Hawthorne uses that kind of to show the sweet moral blossom, because it's kind of, if it was all happy, you wouldn't really notice it, but with like a background darkness, I guess, it shows it.
And how do you guys think this kind of relates to like our own lives? Because, I mean, usually with books, when they don't relate to our lives at all, they kind of just, they pass through the years, you know, we don't really talk about them anymore. But this book has stayed with us, so in some ways we kind of relate to it. How do you guys think our lives relate to the book?
Okay, I think it was interesting how adultery is, it's like church and state were kind of combined in the book, if you think about it, and like society today, we kind of more separate them, or we try to. So it's interesting to see how it's punished as if someone like in our society robbed something or like committed a crime like that. Like Hester's punished similarly, except as she's thrown in prison, although the A is a lot different, the Scarlet Letter. So I thought that was interesting. And it's interesting how she's put up on a platform, you know, on the scaffold in front of everyone, that we don't really have, you know, it's just so different in the Puritan society compared to, like in that time period, compared to now. So.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting how like everything's like so different now than it was back then. So like that's why you like wrote about it then, because everything is so different, and just to show us like how much things have changed and stuff.
And kind of on a similar note, I think that although that like kind of the time period is different, we still struggle with the same things like sin and guilt and kind of all these emotions that come with the mistakes that you make. And
today's society, we still have like guilt and people condemning others and stuff like that. But it just, now it's not as open. Like normally you're judging people like behind doors or like talking behind people's backs, where then it was all open and all out in the open, and she was forced to deal with her sin in front of everyone instead of her not necessarily like now like she's not really condemned by everyone, but she could be without knowing it, because maybe people are like talking without her knowing, but then she knew that everyone was judging her for it.
And I agree with Maddie, like, if someone were to get pregnant at Olympus, then, like, I know there would be like, there would be a lot of judging, and it would still be kind of public, because you'd have to come deal with it, but, like, we would still, I know a lot, people would talk about it, and you would get kind of, like, an image in your head, so that still kind of relates to today, that, like, even if you do something, people are still kind of quick to judge, and, like, it's not as bad as it was in, like, a Puritan, strict society, but it's still.
It's also really weird comparing like the whole Puritan society to a high school, because it totally like does relate, like, because her standing on the scaffolding back then is just like if a pregnant girl was walking around the halls at Olympus, like she would stick out and everyone would be like watching her and judging her. So it's weird how much they relate.
But I feel like we're also a lot different, because whereas they like wouldn't talk to her and they shunned her from society, we would still be nice to her. At least I hope I would. Still try to be your friend and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I sort of agree with that, but I kind of also disagree. I feel like, especially like at Olympus, it's a lot nicer than a lot of other high schools, but I feel like in a general society, like in the entire United States, people wouldn't be as nice, and people like teen pregnancy and stuff is really frowned upon in a lot of places, and I feel like they would get a lot of judgment based off of like that kind of stuff. I don't feel like people would be that nice. I mean, like you'd try to, but it'd be kind of hard to like be nice, I guess. I don't know.
So then what do you guys think of her punishment? Do you think it was just?
No, I don't think her punishment was just, because it was more of like a moral sin, and of course is like stood where the, I don't think it should have been mixed, like church and state should have been mixed, like I said before, but I think that Hester, like, it was right that she accepted her sin, you know what I mean, and on all the punishments that came with it, but I feel like she shouldn't have been put in jail or anything, you know what I mean, that she should have repented, like, because she did commit adultery, but I don't feel like she should have been thrown in jail for so long and had to wear an A for her whole life, because it was just one mistake she made, and she was just had to be punished throughout her whole life in that community. So.
I agree with Alex. Like, her actions, they didn't impact the community at all. Like, she didn't hurt anybody or do anything to like break the law necessarily, well, politically. And so I think that like that was just a personal matter in her life, and it shouldn't have been to like the public attention. Like, she should have dealt with it with like her church leaders, but then again they were combined, and so I don't think it should have been as big of a deal as it was, because it didn't hurt anybody.
And I agree, because sin is kind of a personal thing. You committed, you deal with the punishment. And they're so religious, it's kind of funny how they combine church and state so much that they think it's their responsibility to punish her for her sin, when really, if they are so religious, they should believe that there's a time and place in the future where she will get punished for what she's done, and that it's not a human's responsibility to do that. What God's job is to do is to punish you for what you've done, that he deems wrong.
I also think that like they might have been punishing her then because like at least in most religions I know about, they believe that like Jesus Christ and Heavenly Father are super merciful, and so I think that they're thinking that they're like taking his job off so he doesn't have to like punish his daughter, and so like he's not the one to be like how if my parents, if I like did something bad at school or something, they would have like the administration deal with me. They wouldn't want to do it because I'm their daughter. Like they would feel bad, and I think that they were kind of realizing that they either do it how they think that it should be done, and of course in this time period people moved from England just so that they could have church and state combined, and so it could be a Puritan community and they could enforce anything they wanted to, just how they wanted to. So, yeah, that's just my thoughts.
I also wonder, like, this is kind of a different direction, but like, I mean, Dimsdale, he was not the one to have the baby, so he didn't have to confess, you know. What if Hester, like, if she wouldn't have gotten pregnant, would she have confessed? Like, so I know everyone was talking about, like, how she dealt with her sin and she confessed and acknowledged it, but honestly, she just had the baby and that was proof enough. And so I don't really know if she, I mean, do you guys think she would have, I don't know, like, confessed if she wouldn't have had the baby? Yeah.
Like, with going with what Alex said, how much do you think that, like, her confession, because she had the baby, changed her life? How much did that symbol change her life and affect it?
It changed, like, the course of her life, because I feel like we said, I don't think she necessarily would have come clean, and like, if she didn't have the baby, she wouldn't have confessed her sin. And so it changed her life because with the baby, she had to, she was put in jail, but she was tormented and she was judged, and so it changed the course of her life. She now has to care for a child and make sure that, like, her needs are taken care of, along with that guilt that she had. So I definitely think it affected her greatly, and it changed how her life was going.
Yeah, I feel like Pearl definitely changed Hester's life for the better. Back to like the first question when we're talking about if it was a curse or a blessing. I think she's a blessing because Hester knows she's done something wrong, but she's able to like with Pearl, she's able to continuously try to work off sort of her debt for this sin and like kind of help her get back to where she wants to be as a good person and like make up for her sin kind of. And so I feel like with Pearl and being able to take care of her and Pearl kind of pushing her to make better choices and to like fix the things that she's already kind of messed up in her life, I think that definitely helps her relieve her sin. And if like she didn't have Pearl, it would have been harder for her to live with everything that she did with Dimsdale.
Does anybody else have any thoughts about whether Pearl's a blessing or a curse?
Well, I think it definitely changed Pearl and Dimsdale's life for like good, but I also think it was inevitable. Like eventually they would have had a baby because the affair would have continued. It's just having Pearl had that stop and it like ratted them out. So then they had to be punished, or just Hester.
I think she's a blessing in a way because she kind of makes Hester want to be a better person because Hester, she kind of having the child, she doesn't sit there and feel this guilt that she is privately hiding because she probably wouldn't have confessed. But having this baby made her try to take care of it and try to show that she's a good mom and that she's still a good person in the community. And Pearl promotes her to do good things like when Mistress Hibbins invites her to go to the witch meeting in the forest. It was kind of having Pearl that makes Hester not want to go there because she has this other obligation rather than throwing away her life because she feels something else inside. It's kind of Pearl that keeps her grounded.
Right. And so why do you guys think that Pearl is seen as this beautiful, devilish, kind of elfish girl, even though we're in like a Puritan kind of like setting where everybody is a completely different belief. You know, they have a completely different belief, but yet there's this girl and she's not only the product of sin, but she's completely outside of the religion. What do you guys think about that?
I think that she's there to add like contrast to the book, like how like there's the big prison and then there's the rose bush next to it. I see it as all of those people are like trying to live like so perfectly, but they're condemning themselves so much for sin. And Pearl doesn't. She like kind of realizes that she's like there for some reason, and it's not like she doesn't totally understand yet because she's so young, but she's like the contrast showing that like sin is a part of life, and it can be a beautiful part of life if you learn from it. And I think that Pearl is like the literal example of Hester learning from her sin, and I think that's why she's so beautiful.
Okay, so another person that is kind of really affected by this would be Roger Chillingworth. Do you guys have any thoughts on him, about his actions, like why he did what he did? He was justified.
I'm not saying it was justified, but it kind of makes sense. I mean, he was lonely, and then he comes back and he's embarrassed because his wife cheated on him. And then, like, and then the person he friends in the community turns out to be the guy his wife cheated on. And so, like, all of these things are collapsing on him, and so I guess he has nothing else to do, but, because it's unfair to him, so he just dedicates his life on seeking revenge.
But I still don't think it was justified. Because like a marriage is making things work, and obviously this is like a really big bump in the road. But like, he should go and talk to Hester and see what was going on, and like say, I'm sorry I was gone for so long, but like, let's try to work this out and get back to where we were, instead of like, I'm gonna go mess with the guy you got knocked up by. So I don't think he was justified. Like, he should have, there were a ton of ways that he could have been better. Sorry for my language.
I think the problem with that solution is that Hester never really loved Roger Chillingworth at all. It wasn't love for either of them. So really they shouldn't have gotten married in the first place, I think.
Yeah, I was thinking about that because he kind of had this idea when he saw Hester, he kind of envisioned this perfect life that he would have because he's really smart, and so he would probably have a successful career, and then he wants to have a family, just go along with it. And so he sees Hester, and she's this beautiful young girl, and he's like kind of trying to redo his life by getting married and just going forward. But he's doing it for his own personal gain. He isn't thinking of, how am I going to make this woman happy for the rest of my life, you know? Is she the one I really want to marry and make happy? And so she kind of just doesn't really have that compassion that a husband has. And so she tries to find that on her own, and it kind of just messes up everything. If it had been different, then she could have, you know, had the love with Chillingworth, Dimsdale, and then Chillingworth could have maybe found joy in something else without trying to force it.
I think he eventually sees that he's not being compassionate, though. Like at the jail when they're talking, after he's like acting like the doctor or whatever, how he's like, oh, I wronged you, like it was my wrong when I married you. So I think that he kind of realizes that he was marrying her like for his own selfish reasons, and that he like wasn't actually doing it for love.
I definitely don't think he should have punished, he made Dimsdale feel so guilty for so many years, even like especially when he found out what his position was. I mean, and he kept pressing him talking about how he thought his sickness might have been part of something to do with his conscience and something he had done that he was guilty for, and he kept pressing Dimsdale for this, but Dimsdale wouldn't really tell him. And but when he finally found out, I think it was not justified at all. That he should have, at least backed off a little bit.
So what do you guys think would be the darkest, like for example, do you think that hatred would be darker, or vengeance would be darker, or guilt? Which one do you think would be the darkest of like all the dark things you can do? That makes sense.
I think hatred, because Chillingworth is like prime example on like what hatred does to a person. He literally dies because of it, or
So, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, yeah, because like from the beginning of the book, he was this scholar, and I don't know, yeah, and he just changed to this devilish figure just because of hatred. So you're right. I think it can do a lot to a person.
I think it's vengeance though, because I think that hatred, though it like affects you, it doesn't really like affect anyone else. Like if you hate someone and you don't like do anything about it, then it's not like gonna be bad for them. But if you have this hatred and then you decide that vengeance is like what's gonna be best for you, see, he ended up bringing down Dimsdale even more than he was already like putting the guilt on himself. Don't like that. And he stop. And he also was bringing down himself just even more, and because he started like thriving off his vengeance. So I think that's what really killed him, was his revenge.
Yeah, I think that vengeance is kind of a higher form of hatred in a way, because if you hate someone, like you'll hate somebody but you'll kind of get over it. But if you hate somebody so much that you think you need to seek revenge for it, I think it just shows the level of like confusion and hatred in someone if they think that they need to seek vengeance for it.
Well, Chillingsworth's vengeance is so powerful that it literally like corrupts him. Like we see him at first, he's like this nice doctor person, and then to the end people start looking at him and he's like an evil sort of face, and at the end he literally is corrupted by his vengeance and it kills him from the inside out.
So then who do you guys think suffered the most in the book?
I don't know. I have kind of this thing that it's kind of between Dimsdale and Chillingworth, because Chillingworth suffers in a way that he's suffering because he's trying to get some gain or some solace from kind of this revenge towards Dimsdale. He wants to find kind of this ultimate solution, while Dimsdale just feels like he can't live with himself because he feels so bad for what he's done. And so it kind of is these two different times of suffering, and it just kind of depends on how you view it, who's suffering more.
Yeah, and I agree with that, because I think for a while both of them are reminders of like what they're suffering of, for both Chillingworth and Dimsdale, especially when they start living with each other.
Yeah, I think that Dimsdale suffers the most individually in the story, but I think that Hester has to deal with the most suffering because she has to juggle Dimsdale's guilt for kind of ruining Chillingworth's life, and she has to deal with Chillingworth trying to seek revenge on Dimsdale, and then Pearl kind of just keeps reminding her of those two and their feud towards each other over her, sort of. And so I feel like just her having to think about all those different things makes her suffering a little bit worse than everyone else's.
I think like internal suffering is much worse though than external. Like Hester's all out in the open, and yes, Pearl is a reminder of the sin she committed, but also Pearl brings her a lot of happiness. Like she loves Pearl, and I think that's what helps her get through her life too, is to thrive on Pearl's happiness and being a motherly figure to her, while Dimsdale just constantly, every day of his life, I mean, he creates sermons to the public about sin just because of, and he talks about how he should probably take his own advice of the sin, you know what I mean? And he feels so guilty. It's to the point where it's just driving him mad, and he gets up in the middle of the night and goes up to the scaffold and, kneels on it because he feels all the guilt from all the sins. And if he would have released it sooner, he probably would have still suffered, but a lot less than what he actually did.
Who do you guys think is a symbol of Dimsdale's character? Like, what does he represent, like, in our own lives, or even just in the book?
I think relating it to our lives, we've all, or I don't know, at least I have had like a person that like we like love and like have a high standard, and then you like find out the truth about them, and it like totally corrupts this holy idea you had about them, and it turns out they're not the person you thought they would be.
Also, like, brings the idea, like, Dimsdale, he doesn't own up to. I feel like he should have owned up to his sin from the beginning. I don't know. I think it was kind of selfish of him, even though he justifies it with being a pastor and still continuing to help others because he knows he won't be able to after he confesses. But I still feel like in our daily lives, like if we commit sins and things, that we don't always confess for what we've done or apologize to people even though we should. And like I know that happens all the time, and even if it's little things, but like, yeah, I just feel like Dimsdale like should have confessed. Really.
Yeah, I respectfully disagree. I feel like it was important that he didn't confess right away, because even though in some ways it is kind of selfish that he didn't, I feel that it really helped a lot of the people in the town, even if he was sort of not a good example, he definitely helped the people in the town. He was always there for them, like, to help them with their struggles in life, and like tried to help everybody with their problems. And he was just there for everybody, even though he wasn't completely there for himself. I feel like him as a symbol of relief for everyone else was important, and if he would have confessed, he wouldn't have been able to do that for everyone in the town.
I also feel like, I also feel like he could have been like a better pastor if he would have admitted it, because people would have seen it, like he does sin just like them, and it would have like maybe made them like take his sermons real to heart, because he has like the experience and he knows what he's going through and he knows what they're going through, and like he understands, and he's already come to terms with his sin, and he's already like repented and like gotten back on God's good side, I guess. And so he's still like has the power to do these sermons, and I think that they could be even stronger if he would have confessed.
And it also would have taken some of the pressure off of Hester. Like, she wouldn't have been in, like, she wouldn't have gotten the full force of all the condemnation and judgment and everything. Like, if he had come in and stepped up and been like, hey, I also sinned and we committed adultery, like, and that would have, like, kind of helped Hester out, and she wouldn't have received so much just, like, hate and condemnation and not being nice to.
But if Dimsdale I just saw this, if he had admitted his sin the same time Hester did, well, Hester kind of was found out, but if he had, like, admitted to that, then he wouldn't have been the one who was giving her the more lenient punishment. They probably both would have had to either die or be kind of pushed out of the community. And so it's kind of, you never know what would happen if Dimsdale would have confessed, because he has these two conflicting parts of himself that could have gone in two different directions.
So then what do you guys think is the significance of them not having their happy ending and not being able to live together, instead Dimsdale having to die or choosing to die?
I think it just shows like that your actions like have consequences, I guess. So just that, like everything they went through, and like you always want to see that happy ending, but that's not always how it happens, and like their lives could have been different if this like bump in the road hadn't occurred. But so just that their actions led up to this, and so it teaches us, which still applies to today, that our actions do have consequences.
Yeah, I agree. It's more realistic, because not everyone who commits sin ends up having had a happy resolution to it. Sometimes they have to just live with it and have a consequence that's with them forever.
One thing that Hester says is how she believes that living her life like that, like with the punishment, is in the end going to hopefully make her kind of have a clean slate in front of when she enters heaven, or when she's judged or whatever. What do you guys think about that? Do you think that her punishment is going to actually help her so that she has that kind of a clean slate?
Yeah, I feel like she, like through the book, she starts to help people and stuff, and people start to, like the Scarlet Letter starts to represent Abel instead of adulterer. I feel like throughout the book she just kind of she helps people and makes up kind of for her sin, and I feel like I think that like eventually she does end up, it does give her more of a clean slate than if she hadn't done that.
Yeah, because because she like does a lot for all the poor, and she does a lot of charity work, and I feel like she's trying to work off her work off her sin, you know what I mean? Because she feels guilty, but she feels like she should still wear it, but that she can move on and just help others, and because I know. And then there's the part like where Roger, when she talks to him in the forest, and he tells her talks about all the good deeds she's done, and asks if she would like to remove the Scarlet Letter. How they were going to talk about it in the town, but she refuses because she feels like she doesn't deserve to remove it. I don't know, that's what I think.
I think punishment isn't for other people. Punishment is to change yourself, and Esther really was changed by the end of the book, so I don't think she was guilty at all at the end.
Who else do you guys think changed at the end of the book? Something dramatic or significant things?
Well, Dimsdale definitely changed. Like, he was staying the same way for 7 years, racked with pain and guilt, but then finally talking to Hester, and he decided that he wanted to confess him to everybody. That was a really big change for him when that side went out.
I also think that Pearl changed because, like Miss Bishop was saying, she was kind of, throughout the book, she was kind of thought of as like an elfish child and not like a real child, and in Hawthorne, like, gave her such a superior, like, tone to her voice, you know what I mean? And then when Dimsdale confesses and she kisses him, it's like, yeah, like she becomes her own person.